I didn't know what it was or what it wanted, but it was here and it was alive. And just as I steadied myself, as I tried to process the horror of where I was, I heard it. The sound that had been lurking in the background, the one I had ignored, the whispering. It was faint at first, like the breeze, but it grew louder until it was a voice, 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, speaking in tongues, speaking in words I didn't understand but felt in my bones, resonating with something deep inside me. The words twisted and turned, danced like smoke, and each one dug deeper into my mind, carving themselves into my consciousness, and then, like a switch flipping, the whispers stopped. A heavy silence pressed in on me, and I realized something was watching me. Something had always been watching me, and it wasn't just the shadows. It was the town itself, its eyes hidden behind the walls, its thoughts locked away in the dark. But it knew me. It knew everything about me. I felt the chill in the air deepen, and a shadow moved across the floor in front of me, slow and deliberate. And I didn't need to turn to know it was the faceless figure again, my reflection, my other self. It moved with purpose, like it had always been here, like it had been waiting for me, and I didn't dare speak, didn't dare make a sound, because I knew, whatever this thing was, it didn't care about words, it didn't care about anything human. It was made of this place, shaped by the town's hunger, by its thirst for something that wasn't quite alive, and it was leading me somewhere, guiding me deeper into the heart of this nightmare. My feet moved without my consent, carried forward by the same unseen force that had controlled me since I entered this town. I couldn't stop myself, couldn't escape, and I felt the walls pressing in on me as I followed the figure through a narrow passageway, the shadows twisting and warping as we moved, each step heavier than the last, and the whispers returned. Louder now, growing louder and louder until they were deafening, until it felt like my mind was going to crack open from the weight of it. And then, just as suddenly, the hallway opened up into a vast chamber, a cavernous space filled with endless rows of mirrors. Mirrors that reflected not my face, but the faces of others, faces that looked like me, twisted versions of me. Versions that were older, younger, distorted in ways I couldn't begin to describe, and I felt my stomach drop as I realized they weren't just reflections, they were memories, fragments of my past, of everything I had ever done, every mistake, every regret, every moment I had tried to forget. They were all here, staring back at me, frozen in the glass. And then, without warning, the mirrors began to crack one by one, each fracture like a heartbeat, slow at first, then faster. And the sound of breaking glass filled the air, ringing in my ears, and I tried to move, to run. But my legs wouldn't respond, my body frozen like I was trapped in place by the weight of those shattered reflections. And I realized too late, this wasn't just a room of mirrors, it was a room of souls. My souls. The pieces of me that the town had taken, that it had stolen from me. And now they were all trapped here, imprisoned in the glass, screaming silently, begging for release. I couldn't look away. I couldn't escape. And then, in the midst of the chaos, I saw it. A door at the far end of the chamber, barely visible through the haze of shattered glass and writhing shadows, and something in me, something primal, urged me forward, urged me to reach it, to leave this place before it consumed me completely. But as I moved toward the door, something else moved in the shadows, something darker, something older. And I knew with every fiber of my being that whatever was waiting on the other side of that door, whatever was beyond it, would be the final chapter in my story, the end of everything I had ever known. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to face it, but it didn't matter. I had no choice. The door creaked open before I could touch it, and the world beyond it beckoned, cold and empty, like a tomb waiting to swallow me whole, and I stepped through, not knowing what awaited me on the other side, but knowing that there would be no going back. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew I had made a mistake. The air was thick, heavier than it had been before, and colder too, biting at my skin with an unnatural chill that made my bones ache. And the silence, it was absolute, suffocating, like I had crossed into another plane, a place that existed outside of time, a place where nothing could ever grow or die, a place where the rules of the world didn't apply. I tried to move, but my feet felt like they were stuck in place, like I was standing on some invisible threshold that I couldn't cross, a line that I had already crossed, and now there was no turning back. I stood there, staring into the abyss before me, but the more I looked, the less I could see. No walls, no ceiling, no floor beneath my feet, just an endless expanse of blackness, as though the town itself had swallowed me whole and was now spitting me back out into a place where nothing existed except darkness. But then, out of the void, a shape began to form, faint at first, but slowly becoming clearer, like a figure materializing out of smoke, and as it drew closer, I could feel the cold presence of whatever it was, and a voice, deep and resonant, echoed from the shadows. "You're too late." And I didn't need to ask who it was. It was the same voice from the mirrors, from the whispers, the voice of the town itself, of the thing that had been pulling at me, drawing me in from the very moment I took the wrong turn. And now, standing here in this vast empty space, I realized it had been watching me all along, waiting for me to step into its grasp. I tried to speak, tried to demand answers, to make sense of this madness, but no words came out, and the cold grew deeper, colder, until it felt like my heart was going to freeze in my chest. And that's when I saw it. A faint glow, barely, visible in the distance like a flickering candle in the dark, and instinct took over, urging me to move toward it, to reach it, but with every step it felt further away, like it was pulling me, leading me deeper into this nightmare. The shadows shifted around me, their shapes warping and twisting, moving in ways that didn't make sense, like they were alive, like they were feeding off my fear. And I could feel it now. The presence. The thing that had been waiting for me, that had been inside my mind all along, guiding me, pushing me forward. And the closer I got to the light, the more the world around me seemed to break apart, like the very fabric of reality was unraveling. I reached the light, my hand trembling as I reached out. But as soon as I touched it, the light flared, blinding, and for a moment I thought I might be swallowed whole, consumed by it. But then, just as quickly, the light vanished, and the world around me collapsed, and I was falling again, falling into nothingness, and I screamed. But the sound was swallowed by the silence, and I felt like I was being pulled into some infinite black hole, no up, no down, no sense of direction, just falling. And then I hit the ground hard and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was back in the town, standing at the crossroads where I had first arrived, and the town looked the same, too perfect, too still, and for a moment I wondered if it had all been a dream, if I had imagined the whole thing, but then I saw it, just a flicker at first, a shadow moving in the corner of my eye, and I turned, but it was gone, and then I heard it, the whispering, faint but unmistakable, like the wind rustling through dead leaves. And I knew this was no dream. This place wasn't a dream. It was real and it was alive, and now I was part of it, just another lost soul in its grasp. And as I stood there, staring down the empty road that stretched before me, I realized there was no escape. The town had already claimed me, just like it had claimed all the others, and I wasn't going anywhere, not ever again. I wasn't even sure if I was still alive anymore, or if I had crossed into some twisted version of reality. But the only thing that mattered now was that I was here, stuck, trapped, and the town had its grip on me, its hungry, unyielding grip. And I knew there was no way out. Not for me, not for anyone who found themselves lost here. The light had vanished, the whispers had stopped, but the town, this town, was still here, waiting, watching, and I had become part of its story, just another face in the dark, another name that would be forgotten in the passage of time. And I realized, with a cold shiver creeping up my spine, that this town would never let me go. I had made a wrong turn once, but that was all it took. Now I was just another part of the myth, just another chapter in a book that was never meant to be read, a story that would never end. And as I stood there, in the dead silence of the town that didn't exist on any map, I could feel it, the pull, the call, urging me to move, to walk the roads that would never lead anywhere but deeper into its heart. And I took my first step, unsure of where it would lead, but knowing deep down that it didn't matter. I had already been swallowed whole. I had already become part of the town, and I wasn't getting out. I don't know how much time passed. It could have been days, weeks, or even months for all I knew. But the town had changed, or rather, it was as though I had changed. It was hard to remember who I had been before, when I had been me. Before this nightmare had begun, but now, standing in the middle of the road under the dim glow of streetlights that flickered without purpose, I felt disconnected, like I wasn't entirely present, like a part of me had already slipped away, leaving only an echo of who I once was. The town had a way of doing that to you, I realized. Its grip was subtle at first, like a whisper in the back of your mind, convincing you to stay, to just walk a little further, to turn the next corner. But once it had you, once you were in its grasp, it wouldn't let go. The feeling of being watched was constant now, always there, pressing on me from all sides, no matter where I went, no matter what I did. The people, if they could be called people, moved like shadows in the corner of my vision, just out of reach, never fully in sight but always present, always lurking. I tried to speak to them at first, tried to ask if they knew what was going on, if they knew how to escape, but they only stared at me with hollow eyes, their faces expressionless, their mouths unmoving. I could hear their whispers, though, soft and indistinct, like the murmur of 1,000 voices all speaking at once, each one saying something different, each one weaving its own story, but none of them ever answered my questions. Instead, they watched, and I began to feel like I was part of their story, like I was just another character in this strange, twisted tale, and I didn't know if I had ever really been in control. I tried to leave the town again, tried to find the road I had come in on, but it wasn't there anymore. The crossroads were gone, the familiar landmarks I had passed on my way in, now nothing but memories that faded into the mist. And as I walked, the streets seemed to shift beneath my feet, the buildings rearranging themselves, as though the town was alive, shifting and changing, bending the laws of space and time. I could feel it now. The town wasn't just a place. It was something else, something older, something that had been here long before I arrived, long before anyone had ever found it. I had walked into its web, and now I was trapped, and it wasn't letting me go. I tried to find the others, the ones who had come before me, but I couldn't. They were all gone, vanished into the shadows, or maybe they had never existed at all. There was no trace of anyone, no hint of where they had gone or what had happened to them, and I realized with a growing sense of dread that the town didn't just take people, it erased them. Their memories, their identities, everything that had made them who they were, all gone, absorbed into the town itself, like they had never been there at all. The more I thought about it, the more I began to question everything. Had I been erased too? Was I even real? The thought haunted me, gnawed at the edges of my mind, and I couldn't escape it. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw someone else staring back at me. Someone I didn't recognize, someone whose face had begun to blur, as though it was fading away, losing its shape. I wondered if I had already disappeared, if I was just a reflection of someone else's nightmare, trapped in this place that didn't exist, that couldn't exist. But there was no time for those thoughts now. I could feel something else, the pull of the town, the call of whatever force controlled it, drawing me towards something I couldn't understand. I had no choice but to follow, to let the town lead. Me, because I knew deep down that I was already a part of it, already a part of its story, and there was no going back. The streets twisted ahead of me, the path opening up like a dark tunnel, the buildings looming over me like sentinels, watching my every move, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had to keep moving, had to keep walking, because I knew that if I stopped, if I stayed in one place for too long, the town would claim me completely, would erase me like it had done with the others. As I walked, the air grew heavier, colder, and I could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind me, soft at first, like a shadow trailing my every step. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I knew better than to look. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right behind me, and I felt a breath on my neck, icy and cold, and a voice whispered in my ear, so close, so real, "You're not going to make it." And I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. And for a moment I thought I might fall to my knees, thought I might lose myself entirely, but then I forced myself to keep walking, to keep moving forward, because I knew that the moment I stopped, I would be swallowed whole, and that voice would become my own. I had to keep going, I had to outrun it. But the path ahead only grew darker, and I felt the shadows pressing in from all sides, closing in on me. And just as I thought I couldn't go any further, the town revealed itself to me, its true form, its heart, the center of its power, and I stood there in awe and horror, staring at the thing that had been waiting for me all along. It was a building, but not a building at all. It was a structure, an entity, a living thing that had grown from the very earth itself, its walls pulsating with a strange, unnatural rhythm, its surface shifting and changing, as though it was breathing. The door, if it could be called a door, opened before me, and I felt it. The pull, the desire to step inside, to cross the threshold, to give in to whatever it was that the town wanted from me. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face whatever waited for me in that dark, shifting place, but I couldn't stop myself. I stepped forward, drawn by an irresistible force, and as I crossed the threshold, I realized with a sickening clarity, I had never been in control. Not then, not now, not ever. The town had always been in control, and I was just another puppet. In its twisted, unending play, the moment I crossed the threshold, the world around me shifted again. The air inside was colder than before, if that was even possible, and the smell, it was a strange, musty scent, like decay mixed with something else, something metallic, but it wasn't the kind of decay you'd find in nature. No, this was something far older, something man-made, something that had been festering for years, centuries maybe, waiting for the right moment to consume everything around it. The walls inside were covered in layers of thick black grime, as though no one had been here in ages, if anyone ever had. The floor beneath my feet was uneven, cracked in places, and I could feel the faint vibration of something beneath the building, something alive, something hungry. I wanted to turn back, to run, to do anything but step further into the abyss, but I couldn't. The moment I stepped into that building, I felt it. It was as though something had locked its claws around me, and there was no escape. The door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, and I spun around, panic rising in my chest. But there was nothing. No door, no window, just the endless walls of this forsaken place, and the silence. It was the silence of death, of a place that had been forgotten, left behind to rot. My breath came faster now, my heart pounding in my chest as I took a few steps forward, the echo of my footfalls ringing out in the stillness like a warning, but I pressed on. I had no choice. It was like a compulsion, a force pushing me forward, deeper into the heart of this place, and as I walked, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and bend around me, shifting in ways they shouldn't have been able to, like they were alive, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with some strange energy, and every time I glanced at them, I swore they moved, just a little, as though the building itself was aware of my presence. I had to keep moving, had to keep my mind focused, or else I knew I would be lost forever. As I walked deeper into the building, I began to hear the faintest sound, a low hum, so quiet that at first I thought I was imagining it. But no, it was real, coming from somewhere ahead, somewhere deep in the building. It was like the hum of machinery, of something vast and complex running just below the surface, something that didn't belong here, and my mind raced trying to make sense of it, but no answer came. The sound grew louder as I moved forward, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and writhe in response, as though they were aware of my every step, every move. I had to know what was making that noise. I had to see what was at the heart of this place, what was pulling me deeper into it, and so I pressed on, until finally I came to the source of the sound. It was a door, old and weathered, like the rest of the building, but this one was different. It was made of some dark, unnatural wood, its surface carved with strange symbols, symbols that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, twisting into shapes that made my head ache and my stomach churn. I reached out to touch it, but as my fingers brushed the surface, a wave of cold washed over me and the door creaked open, slow and deliberate, revealing what lay beyond. It was a room, but not a room like any I had seen before. The walls were covered in some sort of dark, slick substance like oil, but thicker, more viscous, and as I stepped inside, The door slammed shut behind me with a sound that made my heart stop. I was trapped. The room was empty, save for a large metal contraption in the center, its shape unlike anything I had ever seen. It was a machine, yes, but it was more than that. It was alive somehow, pulsing with the same unnatural energy that I had felt in the town, and I could feel it in the air around me, that same suffocating presence pressing in on me from all sides. The hum of the machine grew louder, and as I approached it I could see the faint outlines of figures inside, shapes moving, twitching, writhing like they were trapped inside, like they were part of it, part of whatever this thing was. And I realized with a sickening certainty that I had seen these shapes before. The faces of the missing, the ones who had disappeared, had they been absorbed into this? Had they become part of whatever this machine was, part of the town's twisted heart? I wanted to turn away, to run, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to escape the pull of the machine, the pull of the town. And then the voice came again, that deep, resonant voice that had haunted me from the very beginning, the one I had heard in the mirrors, in the shadows, the one that had spoken to me in my dreams. "You're too late," it said, its tone low and almost soothing like a lullaby, but there was nothing comforting about it. "You belong here now." And then the room seemed to shift again, the walls closing in around me, and I felt the floor beneath my feet give way. And I was falling into the darkness, and I screamed. But the sound was swallowed by the void, and the last thing I heard before everything went silent was the machine's hum, growing louder, louder, until it was all I could hear, until it consumed everything. And I realized with a sense of finality that I was never going to escape this place, this town. It had claimed me, just like it had claimed all the others, and I was part of it now, part of its story, part of its endless nightmare, and there was no way out. There had never been. The ground beneath me seemed to throb with an energy that I couldn't explain, a pulse that grew stronger with every step I took toward the machine. It was as if the earth itself was alive, feeding on whatever dark power the machine was generating, and I was just another unwitting contributor to its insatiable hunger. As I neared the massive contraption, the air grew thick, heavy with the scent of decay and oil. My limbs felt heavier now, as though something was pulling on them, holding me back, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't resist. The force pushing me toward the machine was too powerful, too all-encompassing. It was like the town itself was a living entity, and I was its prey, its meal, and it was patiently waiting for me to fall into its trap, which I had already done the moment I had entered its boundaries. The machine loomed ahead, monstrous and menacing, its massive gears turning with an unrelenting speed, churning the air around me, grinding out a mechanical hum that reverberated through my chest. The figures inside, those twisted, contorted shapes that had once been people, their faces forever frozen in terror, were now only faint silhouettes against the gears, mere remnants of their former selves. I couldn't even tell where one figure ended and another began. They were just a mass of flesh, metal, and writhing limbs, struggling against the mechanical nightmare that had claimed them, and I realized with a sharp pang in my chest that this was my future, that I, too, would become one of them. I would be consumed, absorbed, and lost to the machine, and there would be no trace left of who I had been. I would fade into the dark, into the nothingness, never to be remembered again. The thought sent a shiver through my spine, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread and hopelessness. This was it. This was the end. There was no escape from this place, no way out of the nightmare that had consumed me the moment I had taken that wrong turn. I had been a fool to think I could just turn back, that I could walk away from this madness. There was no walking away. The town would not let me. The machine would not let me. Everything had been leading to this moment, to this inevitable conclusion. I had thought I was in control, that I could turn the wheel of fate in my favor, but I was just a passenger in a nightmare of my own making. And now there was no more road to travel, no more choices to make. I was trapped in the grip of something far older, far more powerful than I could ever comprehend, and it was closing in around me, suffocating me. My eyes were drawn back to the machine, to the writhing figures, trapped within it. I could see their mouths opening, their eyes wide with terror, and I could hear them faintly as though their voices were being sucked into the very machinery itself. Their cries were muffled, distorted, but they were there, pleading, begging for release, for salvation, but the machine had no mercy. It never had. It was a thing of pure function, of cold, unfeeling mechanics, and it consumed everything in its path, regardless of what it had once been. I reached out almost against my will, my fingers grazing the cold metal surface of the machine, and as soon as I touched it, I felt it. A pulse, a shockwave of energy that surged through me, and I gasped, pulling my hand back as if I had been burned. But it wasn't a burn. It was something else. Something worse. The feeling lingered like a poison running through my veins, a coldness that crept into my bones and settled in my chest, threatening to freeze me from the inside out. I staggered backward, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My head was spinning. The world around me seemed to warp and twist, the shadows growing longer, the ground beneath me shifting as if reality itself was bending, stretching to fit the shape of this nightmare. I had to leave. I had to get out of here. I turned around, hoping to find the same path I had taken to enter the machine's lair, but there was nothing. The town had changed again. The streets I had walked before were gone, replaced by new ones that led nowhere, paths that twisted in on themselves, like the veins of some monstrous creature, trapping me in a maze that I would never escape. My pulse quickened, my chest tightening. With panic, I could feel the walls closing in on me, the weight of the town's darkness pressing down, suffocating me, and I stumbled forward, desperate to find something, anything, that could help me. But all I found were more buildings, more shadows, more twisted facades that seemed to leer at me, mocking my attempts to escape. I had no idea where I was, or even if I was still in the same place. The town had a way of warping, of shifting, its shape, and I was just a ghost moving through it, lost, helpless, and trapped in its sickening web. I collapsed onto the ground, my hands trembling as I tried to steady myself. My mind was racing, but there was nothing. No way to make sense of it, no way to find an exit. I had already tried to leave. I had already tried to run. But every time I thought I had found a way out, the town twisted again, pulling me deeper into its heart. I could feel it now, the eyes of the town upon me, watching, waiting for me to make my final mistake, for me to slip and fall into the machine's grasp, to become just another cog in its endless grinding wheel. It was inevitable. It had always been inevitable. I was never meant to escape. The thought sank into me like a stone, heavy and cold, and I realized that the only thing left was to surrender. There was no fighting this. There was no resisting. I had already lost. The town had claimed me. And now all that was left was to wait. Wait for the machine to finish what it had started. Wait for the final, inevitable end. I stood there, my feet sinking into the cracked earth, staring at the swirling, unnatural sky above, feeling like I was being suffocated by an invisible weight that pressed down on me from all sides. The air around me buzzed, thick with a sense of something not quite right, something unnatural and otherworldly that gripped me with a fear I had never known before. It was as if the town itself had become alive, breathing with its own dark, malicious pulse, and I, its helpless prisoner, was just another piece of the puzzle, another victim caught in its terrifying web. The machine loomed in the distance, its massive gears turning relentlessly, as if mocking me for my attempts to escape. Every time I thought I had a chance to break free, every time I thought I had found a way out, the town would shift again, its twisted streets folding back on themselves like the labyrinthine folds of some nightmarish creature. There was no way out, no way to escape. The thought gnawed at me like a ravenous animal, but the worst part was the understanding that I was not alone in this torment. All around me I could feel the presence of others, others who had fallen victim to this place, others who had been absorbed by the machine and were now nothing more than memories trapped within its gears. I could hear them, faint whispers on the wind, their voices carried on the stale air. But when I tried to listen, to make sense of what they were saying, it was as though they were speaking in a language I couldn't comprehend. There was no clear pattern to the words, no discernible meaning, just a maddening chorus of voices that echoed in the back of my mind. Some of them sounded like they were begging for help. Others screamed in horror, their words twisted with desperation, while others seemed eerily calm, resigned to their fate. I couldn't make out what they were trying to tell me, but I felt their presence, their agony, and their hopelessness weighing heavily on me. It was as though the entire town was a collective of souls, trapped in a perpetual cycle of torment, their existence forever bound to the machine, their suffering feeding its insatiable hunger. As I wandered aimlessly through the town, trying to make sense of it all, I came across something unexpected. A figure standing in the distance, watching me. It was a person, or at least it appeared to be. Their figure was silhouetted against the dark horizon, their features obscured by the haze that clung to the ground like a thick fog. I couldn't tell if they were alive, or just another apparition, another trapped soul, but I felt an undeniable pull toward them, as though they held the answers to the questions that had been tormenting me since my arrival. I tried to move closer, but my body felt stiff, sluggish, as though the weight of the town itself was pressing down on me, making each step a struggle. Still, I pushed forward, driven by an instinct I couldn't explain, a desire to reach this figure, to understand what they knew about this place. When I finally reached them, I could see that they were a man, or what remained of one. His face was gaunt, hollowed out, with eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural intensity. His skin was pale, stretched tight over the bones of his face, and his hair hung in limp strands around his face, as though it had been untouched by time or decay. There was something wrong with him, something that I couldn't place, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. His gaze locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You're here," he said, his voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper, yet it echoed in my mind as though he had shouted it. "I've been waiting for you." His words sent a jolt of terror through me, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, rooted to the spot by his gaze, unable to look away. There was something in those eyes, something that made my stomach turn, something ancient and predatory. "Waiting for me?" I asked, my voice shaky, unsure of what I was even asking. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Yes," he said, his voice colder now, tinged with bitterness. "You're not the first to come here, you won't be the last." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but before I could, he took a step toward me, and I instinctively took a step back. He seemed to glide toward me, his movements unnaturally smooth, like he wasn't entirely of this world. "I was like you. Once," he said, his voice soft, almost mournful. "I thought I could escape, I thought I could outrun the town, outrun the machine, but it always finds you, always. You're just another cog in its gears, another soul it will consume until there's nothing left of you." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, and the fear in my chest grew stronger, tighter, suffocating me. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat as though the air itself was choking me. "Why?" I managed to croak, desperate for answers. "Why does this happen? Why me?" The man's eyes flickered with something like pity, but it was fleeting, gone before I could fully register it. He took another step closer, his breath cold against my skin. "You don't understand yet, do you?" he whispered. "The town doesn't want you to understand. It doesn't want you to know what it really is. It's not just a place, it's a living thing, a creature that feeds off fear, off suffering. And once you're here, once you've been marked, there's no way out. You're part of it now, part of the machine." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps, as the reality of what he was saying began to sink in. The town was alive. The machine was alive. And I was caught in its grip, just like everyone else. I was never meant to leave. "You'll see," the man said, his voice growing more distant now, fading as he turned to walk away. "You'll see what it's capable of. But it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. You're already lost." I watched him disappear into the fog, his figure fading into the shadows of the town. And in that moment, I realized with a crushing certainty that he was right. I was already lost. The town had me. The machine had me. There was no escape. There was no way out. All I could do now was wait. Wait for the end that was coming, because there was nothing left to do but surrender to it. The air felt different now, heavier than before, as though the very atmosphere was thick with despair, saturating everything I touched. I could feel it, pressing against me, suffocating me, seeping into my skin, my bones, and as I stood there, frozen in place, I realized with a creeping horror that I was no longer just a visitor to this twisted place. I was part of it now, a piece of its puzzle, an entity woven into its fabric in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. The man's words echoed in my mind, looping endlessly, a cruel reminder of the truth I had been trying to deny. The town didn't just exist on a map. It existed inside me now, part of my very soul, and just as I had entered its grasp, it had marked me as another unfortunate soul to be consumed by its insatiable hunger, to be twisted and distorted into something unrecognizable. I felt the weight of the machine's presence bearing down on me, its gears grinding relentlessly, turning the air into a sharp electric hum that stung my skin. I had no idea how long I stood there, staring into the depths of the fog, waiting for something, anything to happen, to give me a sign that there was still hope, that there was still a chance to escape this nightmare. But there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the oppressive silence of the town that refused to release its hold on me. My mind raced as I tried to think, to figure out what I could possibly do next. The path ahead was unclear, filled with nothing but darkness and the echoing cries of the lost souls who had walked this same path before me. There was no escape. I had already tried every road, every path, and they all led back to the same place, the machine. The place where the soul was stripped away, where flesh was contorted and twisted into something new, something dark, something horrific. I shuddered at the thought, the images of the twisted figures locked inside the gears flashing through my mind, their faces frozen in a perpetual scream, their eyes wide with terror, their bodies melded with the machine, a grotesque fusion of human and metal. I could feel them, their suffering, their pain, seeping into my consciousness, feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each passing second. The town thrived on fear, on suffering, on the very essence of the human soul. It fed on the terror of those who stumbled into its grasp, and once you were trapped inside, there was no way out, no way to break free from its grip. I turned, my body moving almost involuntarily, drawn by some unseen force, and once again I began to walk through the town aimlessly, as though I were a marionette, my strings pulled by the hands of an unseen puppet master. The buildings around me seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their windows dark and empty, their doors ajar, waiting for me to enter, to be swallowed by them. I avoided them, my mind too frazzled to consider entering any of the structures that loomed like silent sentinels in the fog. I couldn't bear the thought of what might lie inside, what horrors might be waiting just beyond the threshold. I kept moving step after step, as if each movement would take me one step closer to freedom, but I knew better. I knew there was no freedom here, only endless corridors of despair. But as I walked, I began to feel a shift, a change in the air around me. Something was different. The energy, the pulse of the town seemed to be shifting, warping, becoming more concentrated, focused. The fog grew thicker, swirling around my feet like tendrils reaching up to pull me under, and the eerie silence was replaced by a low, droning hum, like the sound of a distant engine, a machine that was beginning to turn its gears once more. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was growing louder, more insistent, until it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, filling my ears, vibrating through my bones. And then, suddenly, I saw it. The machine. It loomed before me, more monstrous than I had ever imagined, its towering form casting a long shadow across the ground. It seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the gears turning in perfect synchrony, as though it were breathing, alive and waiting for me to enter its maw. The figures inside, those twisted, contorted shapes that had once been people, were still there, their bodies forever locked in the machinery, trapped for eternity. Their eyes stared out at me, wide and empty, their faces frozen in terror, and I could feel them watching me, urging me forward, urging me to join them. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to move closer to the machine. I couldn't surrender myself to the darkness that awaited me. Not yet. I turned away, my pulse racing as the weight of the town's presence grew heavier, more suffocating. I had to keep moving. I had to keep searching for a way out, even if I knew deep down that it was impossible. The town had me, and I was never meant to escape, but something inside me refused to accept it. I refused to believe that this was the end. I stumbled forward, my legs shaking, my breath ragged, until I came to a clearing in the middle of the town. It was a strange place, a small patch of open space surrounded by tall, crumbling buildings, but there was something different about it. The air felt lighter here, the fog less dense, and for a moment I thought I could hear the distant sound of something other than the drone of the machine, something like a voice. But it was so faint, so distant, that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. I stood still, straining my ears, and there it was again, a whisper so quiet that I thought it might have been the wind. "Help me!" The voice was soft, desperate, almost pleading. I looked around, my eyes scanning the area for the source, but there was no one except the shadows, the empty buildings, and the endless fog. I stepped forward cautiously, the voice growing louder with each step I took. It was coming from somewhere nearby, from within one of the buildings, I was sure of it. My heart raced as I approached, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to flee, but I couldn't. I had to know. I had to know if there was someone else here, someone who could help me, someone who could explain what was happening. I reached the door of the building, the wooden frame weathered and worn with age. It creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the silence. Inside, the air was colder, heavier, and I could see nothing at first, the darkness swallowing everything whole. But then, slowly, my eyes adjusted, and I saw him. The man was slumped against the wall, his body thin and gaunt, his clothes tattered and torn, and his face was covered in blood, his eyes wide with fear. "Help me," he whispered again, his voice ragged, his breath shallow. I took a step forward, unsure of what to do, unsure of whether this was real or just another twisted illusion created by the town. But something in his eyes, something in the desperation that filled his gaze, made me hesitate. This was real. He was real, and he needed help. But as I reached out to him, my hand trembling, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shape in the corner of the room, a shadow that shouldn't have been there, moving with a strange, unnatural grace. It was large, impossibly large, and as it stepped into the dim light, I could see it clearly. The figure of a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her face was twisted, deformed, her eyes hollow, empty sockets that seemed to stare right through me. Her mouth stretched into a grotesque, twisted smile, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too long, and in her hands, she held something. Something that looked like a weapon, but I couldn't quite make it out. The man in front of me let out a strangled scream, but it was too late. The creature lunged at him, her movement swift and inhuman, and before I could even react, I heard the sickening sound of flesh being torn apart. The man's screams echoed in the room, but they were quickly silenced as the creature tore into him, ripping him apart with a savage hunger that made my stomach churn. I stood there, frozen in place, as the creature turned her gaze on me, her smile widening, and I realized with a horrible certainty that she wasn't here to help me. She was here to kill me. I was frozen in place, my legs refusing to move as the grotesque figure of the woman, or whatever it had become, advanced toward me. Her smile, twisted and unnatural, stretched impossibly wide across her face, and her hollow dark eyes bore into mine, as though she could see straight through me, past my fear, past my very soul. I could feel the air grow thick and heavy around me, the oppressive weight of the town itself closing in, as though it were a living, breathing entity, feeding on my terror. I wanted to run, to flee from the nightmare that had ensnared me, but my body refused to cooperate, paralyzed by the suffocating fear that held me in its grip. The creature was close now, so close that I could hear her ragged breath, the slow, deliberate exhale of something long dead, something that should not exist in this world. I was shaking uncontrollably, my pulse a loud drumbeat in my ears, my mouth dry as dust, and my thoughts scattered, fragmented. I had been running for what felt like an eternity, trying to escape the town's grip. But now, standing before this abomination, I realized that there was no escape. This place had already claimed me. I had wandered too far, strayed too deep into its heart. There was no road back, no way out. The smile on the creature's face widened even further, stretching grotesquely, and I could see her teeth, sharp, jagged, glistening like broken glass, gleaming in the dim light. Her voice, when it came, was a low rasp, a whisper that seemed to echo all around me, reverberating through the very air, as if the town itself were speaking to me. "You shouldn't have come here," she hissed, her voice a twisted mockery of humanity. "No one ever leaves." The word sent a chill down my spine, and in that moment I knew that the town was alive, that it had some malevolent will, some ancient power that fed on those who entered its borders. I had stumbled upon something far older and far darker than I could ever comprehend, but I wasn't ready to die here, not yet. I forced myself to move, my legs finally responding to the surge of desperate will that overwhelmed me. I turned and fled, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my chest as I sprinted down the desolate streets of the town. But it was no use. No matter how fast I ran, no matter which direction I took, the town seemed to shift, to warp around me, like a maze with no exit. The fog thickened, swirling around me, obscuring my vision, and I could feel the presence of the creature following, always just behind me, its footsteps echoing in my mind, growing louder, closer, until it was all I could hear. There was no escape, no way out of this nightmare. I was caught in its web, and it was tightening around me with every passing second. As I ran, the streets began to change again, the familiar buildings morphing into unfamiliar shapes, the houses warping and twisting like something out of a nightmare. I stumbled, nearly falling as the ground beneath me shifted, turning to loose dirt, then to cracked asphalt, then to something wet and slippery. I wasn't sure if I was even still in the same town anymore, or if I had entered another part of the endless maze. I had no bearings, no sense of direction, just the overwhelming urge to escape. Finally, I came to a stop, my lungs burning, my legs weak beneath me. I leaned against a nearby lamppost, gasping for air, trying to gather my thoughts. The creature was still out there. I could feel its presence, but it wasn't close, not yet. In that moment, I realized I had stumbled into what appeared to be a square, a small town center, eerily quiet and empty. There were no people, no sounds, just an unsettling stillness that seemed to permeate every corner of the space. The fog had rolled back a little, just enough for me to make out the shape of a large, crumbling church at the far end of the square. The doors stood ajar, inviting, but I knew better than to trust anything in this forsaken town. Still, the church offered some semblance of sanctuary, and I had no other choice but to head toward it. With every step, my anxiety grew, the nagging feeling that I was walking right into the heart of the nightmare that had claimed this place. As I approached the church, I could see that it was in worse condition than I had thought. Its walls were covered in strange, dark symbols, the windows shattered, and the heavy wooden doors seemed to groan in protest as I pushed them open. The inside of the church was just as decayed as the outside, with pews turned over and dust blanketing every surface. There was no sign of life, no sound except for my ragged breathing and the distant echo of my footsteps. I crept deeper into the church, unsure of what I was hoping to find. Safety, perhaps, or maybe just a brief reprieve from the relentless terror that had followed me since I entered this accursed town. As I reached the altar, I heard a sound, faint but unmistakable, the soft scrape of something moving across the floor. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Slowly I turned, and there she was again, the creature, standing at the entrance to the church. Her twisted smile was still there, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold. But this time, something was different. She wasn't moving toward me. She was waiting. The oppressive silence stretched on, and I realized that the creature wasn't chasing me anymore. It was offering me something far worse than I could ever have imagined. With a final, bone-chilling laugh, the creature stepped aside, revealing a narrow, dark passage behind her. My heart skipped a beat, the realization dawning on me, this was the way out. But I knew, deep down, that there was no escape. The town would never let me go. This was it. I was trapped here forever. As I stood there facing the creature, a wave of sorrow and acceptance washed over me. This town, this cursed place, had claimed me, and in the end there was no escape, no way to outrun the inevitable. I stepped forward into the dark passage, my final destination awaiting me. The door behind me slammed shut with an otherworldly force, the final barrier sealing me into the town that never existed on any map. And then there was only darkness. It started like most bad decisions do, small, harmless, barely noticeable. The kind of thing you shrug off at the moment and only later realize was the stitch that unraveled everything. I was driving cross-country, 3 days deep into a solo road trip meant to clear my head after a bad breakup, a lost job, and the kind of existential crisis you don't even realize you're having until it's already in full swing. I was somewhere between Arkansas and Oklahoma, coasting along a rural highway that had turned from paved to gravel to what I'd generously call a glorified dirt trail, chasing the tail end of golden hour with a half-empty tank and 0 bars of cell signal. The sun had already dipped below the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl across the road behind me, and I kept telling myself I'd turn around after the next mile, or the next curve, or the next town, but the damn town never came, and eventually I passed a crooked wooden sign half-swallowed by weeds that read, Deepwell Eston 1889. And something about that name felt off, like I'd heard it whispered in a dream I didn't remember having. I laughed, shook it off, figured I'd stop for gas and maybe grab a bite, if the place had more than a single pump and a vending machine. I didn't think about how the road narrowed behind me, or how the trees leaned closer. Didn't think about the way the radio hissed faintly, even though it had been dead for an hour, or the fact that my dashboard clock had been stuck at 6:06 for at least 30 minutes. Deepwell wasn't on any map I'd checked, and I'd checked plenty. Physical road atlases, GPS, Google, you name it. But here it was, plain as day. A main street lined with sagging brick buildings and flickering yellow, lights like someone had built a set for an Old West ghost town and forgot to tear it down. I pulled into a cracked lot in front of a diner called Dot's Place, engine idling as I stared through the windshield, trying to place what exactly felt so wrong. And it wasn't just the silence or the eerie sameness of the storefronts. It was the complete lack of motion, like the entire town was holding its breath. No cars passed. No wind stirred the dying trees. No neon signs buzzed. Just me, the car, and the diner door slowly creaking open even though I hadn't moved. I killed the engine, stepped out into air that felt too still, too warm, like it had been inside someone's mouth, and walked toward the entrance, telling myself I was being ridiculous, that old towns were weird, and I was tired and hungry and probably dehydrated. The bell over the door jingled as I stepped in, and for a second I thought the place was empty, but then a woman appeared behind the counter, middle-aged, red lipstick too bright for her pale skin, hair pinned in a beehive like it was still 1963. "Coffee?" she asked, and I nodded, taking a stool without really thinking about it, suddenly aware that the jukebox in the corner was playing a song I knew but couldn't name, something slow and sad and slightly out of tune. "Not from around here. Are you?" she said, pouring a cup even though I hadn't seen a pot, and I gave a half laugh, the kind you do when you're nervous and don't want to sound it. "Just passing through," I said, trying to find my way back to the highway. She gave me a look, not unkind but definitely strange, like she was trying to remember where she'd seen my face before. "Funny thing about Deepwell," she said, setting the coffee in front of me. "It don't much like letting folks leave once they've stepped in." I forced a smile, thinking maybe this was just the kind of weird small-town hospitality you get in places. No one visits anymore, but the coffee was cold, even though it was steaming, and when I looked up again, the woman was gone, and the diner was empty. The music still playing, but the lights flickering like they were underwater. I stood quickly, heart pounding, and pushed open the door. But the town outside had changed. The sun was gone, the sky was overcast and red like it was bleeding, and the buildings all had their windows boarded up. My car was still there, but it looked dusty, abandoned like it hadn't been driven in years. I stumbled toward it, fumbling for my keys, only to find the ignition already on, headlights glaring into thick fog that hadn't been there 2 minutes ago. I turned around to go back inside the diner, but the door was gone, just smooth brick where it had been. That's when I realized something was very wrong. I got in the car, locked the doors, turned off the engine, then back on, hoping something would reset. But the radio came alive with static, and a voice I recognized as my own whispering something I couldn't understand. I floored it, backing out onto the road, tires spinning in loose gravel as I tore back the way I'd come. Only there was no turnoff now, no sign, just endless rows of identical buildings, like the town had looped on itself. I drove for what felt like hours, passing the same gas station, the same barber shop, the same goddamn diner, until finally I slammed on the brakes and screamed into the steering wheel, breathing hard, headlights revealing only fog and more fog. Then, out of nowhere, a figure stepped into view. A man in old-fashioned coveralls with no face, just smooth skin stretched over bone, and he raised one hand, pointing down a side street that hadn't been there before. I don't know why I listened, but I turned the wheel and followed deeper into Deepwell, into a town that I was starting to realize didn't exist in any place that could be found by map, logic, or prayer. And something deep inside me, something primal, whispered that if I didn't find a way out soon, I'd forget who I was entirely, and become just another ghost in the fog. I followed that faceless figure's silent command down the side street, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn back, to slam the gas pedal and tear through whatever this place had become. But the deeper I went, the more that option stopped feeling real, like it had slipped away the moment I crossed some unseen boundary. The road curved inward on itself like a spiral, drawing me closer to a dead center I didn't want to reach, and as the fog thickened, my headlights began to fade, swallowed up by the strange, shifting mist that seemed alive in the way it pulsed. Hand moved just outside my vision, and the buildings lining the street had changed too. They were taller now, narrower, with windows like black eyes watching me pass, and signs in languages I couldn't read, letters twisted into unrecognizable, runes glowing faintly like embers ready to ignite. I tried the radio again, hoping for some kind of signal, even static, but instead I got laughter. Not just one voice, but a chorus, high-pitched and mocking, and I realized it was children, or something pretending to be children, laughing in a way that sounded like glass breaking, and I turned it off, hand trembling on the knob, suddenly aware that my reflection in the rearview mirror was delayed, a half-second behind me, its movement slightly off, mouth not quite syncing with mine. When I muttered, "What the hell is happening?" and when I blinked, it didn't blink back. Panic rose in my throat like bile, but I kept driving, too afraid to stop, too afraid of what might happen if I did, and the road eventually spat me out into a cul-de-sac ringed by crooked houses, their windows pulsing faintly like lungs, and in the center was a massive fountain that spewed thick black water into the air, which hissed when it hit the cobblestone. No streetlights, no stars overhead, just that fountain, and beyond it, a church that looked more like a mausoleum, built from black stone and crowned with a rusted iron steeple that curved like a hook. I parked without meaning to, like the car made the decision for me, and got out, feet moving as if guided by something unseen, the air heavy with a scent like burnt paper and wet earth. And as I walked past the fountain, I heard voices in the water, not echoes, but memories, spoken in my own voice. Moments I hadn't thought about in years, things I'd said in arguments, things I'd whispered in the dark, regrets, mistakes, secrets, and the water hissed louder, splashing me with droplets that burned. So on contact, and I ran, stumbling up the cracked stone steps of the church, pushing open doors that groaned like dying animals. Inside, candles burned with green flames along the pews, casting shadows that moved on their own, and a figure stood at the pulpit, hooded and still, whispering words in that same twisted script I'd seen on the signs, and the whispers filled my ears until I couldn't hear my own thoughts, until I felt something sliding into my head, threading itself between memories, rewriting names, faces, feelings, and then the figure turned to me and its hood fell back, and I saw my own face, older, worn, eyes hollowed out and black as pitch, mouth stitched closed with rusted wire, and it raised a hand in greeting or warning, and I screamed, backing away, knocking over a pew that exploded into dust, the green flames flaring white hot, and I ran back outside, Only the fountain was gone, replaced by a pit deep and wide, with steps spiraling down into darkness. And from the pit came a sound, music almost, played on broken instruments, violins with too many strings, drums made of skin, a melody that pulled at something in my chest, a familiarity that terrified me because I didn't know why it felt like home. I turned and ran toward the houses, thinking maybe I could hide. Maybe I could find someone else, but the doors were all locked or fake, just painted illusions, and the windows were eyes, and the eyes were watching, blinking slowly as I passed. And one of the houses let out a long, low moan that sounded like my mother's voice calling me home. Only she's been dead for 5 years, and I knew if I turned toward it, I'd see her face in the window, and I wasn't ready for that. Not now, not here. So I kept moving. Down. An alley that twisted and narrowed until I had to turn sideways to squeeze through, my clothes catching on splinters of bone embedded in the walls, and I emerged in a courtyard lit by dozens of candles floating mid-air, illuminating hundreds of framed photos nailed to the buildings, pictures of people I didn't recognize, but somehow remembered, like dreams you forget until someone mentions them, all staring out from their frames, mouths open in silent screams. And below each photo was a name scratched into the wood. But when I leaned closer, they changed to mine over and over. Isaac Hale, my name etched in blood beneath every picture, some showing me as a child, others as an old man, some as a corpse, and I turned away, heart racing, eyes burning, and saw the alley had vanished behind me, replaced by a wall of mirrors, dozens of them, tall and thin, showing reflections of me that didn't move, or moved wrong, or were twisted versions, limbs too long, eyes where mouths should be, and in the center stood a mirror that didn't show me at all. Just the street I'd driven in on, the world I'd left behind, normal and quiet, and I lunged at it, but my hands hit solid glass and the reflection flickered, replaced by fire, then fog, then a vision of myself sinking into that pit beneath the church, hands reaching for me, pulling me down, and I backed, away, breath ragged, until a voice behind me said, "Not yet, it's not your time to see." And I spun around to find the faceless man again. Only now he had a face, mine, and he grinned with teeth like nails, pointing down another corridor that hadn't been there a second ago, and I realized with sinking horror that the town was changing with me, growing more familiar, reshaping itself around my memories, and whatever it was, wherever I was, it wanted me to stay, to become part of it, and I didn't know if I could escape, or if I'd already gone too deep. I couldn't look away from the faceless man with my own grin plastered across his features, couldn't even think straight as I followed him down the narrow corridor that twisted and turned like a labyrinth, the walls closing in with every step I took, like the town was breathing around me, pulling me deeper into its unnatural grasp, and the air grew thick, almost syrupy, and it tasted wrong, sharp on the back of my throat, as though I was inhaling something poisonous. And the further we walked, the more the sound of that strange, broken music filled the space, louder now, vibrating the ground beneath my feet, and I realized it wasn't coming from any instruments, not real ones anyway. It was coming from the walls themselves, the air, the very heartbeat of this place, a sick rhythmic thrum that made my skin crawl, and the faceless man, my face, kept moving, his pace slow and deliberate, and I had no choice but to follow. Like some invisible force was pushing me forward, guiding me, and I could feel the pull, a magnetic tug in my chest, like the town was made of something ancient, something hungry, and I couldn't tell if I was walking into its mouth or if I was already inside it. And every time I looked at the walls, the shadows danced and flickered, making shapes, shapes that weren't there before, shapes of things long forgotten, twisted and deformed, like creatures that had been stitched together from scraps of the past. But every time I blinked, they were gone, vanishing before I could make sense of them, and I tried to turn back once, to run, to find my way out of this nightmare. But the hallway stretched on, endless, and no matter how many times I retraced my steps, the walls shifted and changed, like the whole town was mocking me, and the door I'd just passed would reappear in front of me, and the same crooked windows would stare down from above. Only now they were fogged up, and the faces inside them were worse, twisted into grotesque masks of agony. their eyes black, staring at me with a vacant emptiness that made my blood run cold, and every door led back to another. Every path looped back into itself, a never-ending maze of darkened hallways. And I couldn't even remember how long I'd been walking, how many hours or days had passed since I first stumbled into this place, and the thought of time itself seemed meaningless here, like it had no hold over the town that wasn't real. And every corner I turned, every room I entered, the same feeling settled in my gut, that I was being watched, that I wasn't alone, not by any stretch of the imagination, and I could almost feel the weight of the town's eyes on me, its heart beating beneath my feet, pulsing with a rhythm that echoed in my head like a distant drum, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. And then suddenly, without warning, the faceless figure stopped, turning to face me, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was a low rasp, like the wind whispering through dry leaves. "You shouldn't have come here, Isaac," he said. But it wasn't my name, not exactly. It was the name I used before I forgot it, before I became what I was, what they all were, what the town needed, and something inside me twisted, like a knot in my chest, and I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him I was just passing through, that I didn't belong here, but no words came out, just a sharp, dry rasp that left my throat burning. And then I realized I was no longer in control, not of my body, not of my mind. This was the town's doing, the town that ate time and people, that twisted memories like knots, like strings being pulled in every direction, and I wasn't even me anymore, not truly. And the faceless figure took a step forward, and the shadows behind him stretched impossibly long, as if the darkness itself was coming alive. And I knew in that moment that this was it, that this was the end of the road, that I had crossed a line I could never come back from, that there would be no escape from the depths of Deepwell. And the man's grin widened, stretching unnaturally, like his face was made of something that could bend and break and reform without consequence, and his voice filled the air again, as cold and biting as winter's touch. "You will never leave, Isaac. You're already part of this place, part of its story, part of its hunger." And that's when I realized the town wasn't just alive. It wasn't just some twisted anomaly. It was a thing with a mind of its own, a thing that thrived on the lost and the forgotten, on the souls of those who wandered too far, and I had become one of them, just another name on its walls, just another lost memory fading into the fog. The town was feeding on me, and soon I would be just another empty shell, just another face among the countless others that had come before me, never to be seen again. And then the figure took another step, and the ground beneath my feet cracked open, a deep, hollow sound echoing through the darkness. And before I could move, before I could even scream, the shadows closed in around me, and everything went black. I felt the ground give way beneath me before I could even process the fear in my chest. And then there was nothing, just the sensation of falling, as though the very earth beneath my feet had opened up to swallow me whole, and I was tumbling through some vast chasm, a pit of unfeeling darkness that seemed to stretch forever, the air thick and heavy around me, choking me, as though it didn't want me to breathe, didn't want me to survive whatever came next. There was no sound, no noise to tell me I was falling, but I could feel the rush of air tearing past my skin, cold and biting, as though it had a will of its own, and my body twisted mid-air, helpless, a puppet to some unseen force. Then, just as suddenly, my descent stopped, as though something had caught me, but I didn't hit anything. No ground, no floor beneath my feet. Instead, the sensation was more like being suspended in a void, floating in a place where gravity didn't exist. And for a moment I thought I might lose myself in the nothingness, thought I might fade into whatever this place had become. But then slowly, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw them. The walls, faint and shadowy at first, but they solidified with time, emerging from the blackness, rising from the floor and stretching upward into a ceiling I couldn't see. I was in a room, a space, but not one that existed in any conventional way. It was like it had been pulled from my mind, from my own fears shaped by the town's hunger, and there were shapes in the shadows, hunched forms, figures that moved in the periphery of my vision, their edges blurring in and out of focus like they couldn't decide if they were real or if they were just memories, phantoms of something long gone. I stood, not sure of how I was even standing, and my hand reached for the wall, fingers grazing the cold, smooth surface, but as I touched it, a jolt of electricity shot through me, cold and sharp, and I recoiled, pain surging up my arm, and I staggered backward, gasping for air, but no breath came. And that's when I realized the air was thick with something other than just lack of oxygen, something foul and rotting, like the smell of decay or old death, and I could feel it crawling inside of me, wrapping around my lungs, making it harder to breathe, harder to think.